sipurei masios, the second story, the king and the emperor. Once there was a great emperor who did not have any children. There was also a lesser king who did not have any children. The emperor traveled all over the world, trying to find a remedy and a way to have children. The king also traveled around for the same reason. The two of them happened to come to the same inn. They did not know anything about each other, but the emperor recognized a certain royal bearing in the king. He inquired, and the other admitted that he was a king. The king also recognized a certain royal manner in the emperor, and the latter also admitted his identity. The two of them told one another that they were traveling around in order to find a way to have children. They made a pact between them that, when they came home to their wives, if one had a boy and the other a girl, so that they could marry, then the two children would marry each other. The emperor returned home and fathered the daughter. The king also returned home and fathered the son. The pact that they had made, however, was forgotten. The emperor sent his daughter away to study, and the king also sent his son away to study. It turned out that the two of them went to the same tutor. They fell very deeply in love, and they pledged that they would marry. The king's son took a ring and placed it on her hand, and they were thus married. Then the emperor sent for his daughter and brought her home. The king also sent for his son and brought him home. People proposed matches for the emperor's daughter, but she refused all suitors because of her pledge. The king's son missed her very much, and the emperor's daughter was also very melancholy. The emperor brought his daughter to his estates and places to make her aware of her high status, but she was still melancholy. The king's son missed her so much that he became sick. People asked him why he was sick, but he refused to tell them. They asked his valet. They asked his valet, "Perhaps you can find out the reason." The valet replied that he knew the reason, since he was with the prince when he was away studying. He told them the entire story. The king then remembered that he had agreed to a match with the emperor a long time earlier. He wrote a message to the emperor telling him to prepare for the wedding because of the pact that they had made a long time ago. The emperor no longer wanted the match, but he did not dare refuse. He replied that the king should send his son to him, and he would test him. If he was able to govern the kingdom, he would be able to marry his daughter. The king sent his son to the emperor. The emperor placed him in a room and gave him documents dealing with affairs of state to see if he could govern the country. The king's son had a very great yearning to see the emperor's daughter, but he was not given a single opportunity to see her. Once he was walking near a wall of mirrors. He saw her reflection and fainted. She went over to him and revived him, telling him that she would not accept any match because of her promise to him. "What shall we do?" he asked. "Your father will not permit it." "We will go ahead anyway," she replied. They decided they would go out to sea together. They hired a ship and sailed to sea. After they had traveled at sea for some time, they wanted to rest on shore. They came to a shore where there was a forest, and they disembarked. The emperor's daughter took off her ring and gave it to the king's son. She then lay down and went to sleep. Then, when the king's son saw that she was about to wake up, he placed the ring next to her. They got up and headed toward the ship. When she remembered that they had forgotten the ring, she sent him to get the ring. But when he went back, he could not find the place. He went to another place but could not find the ring. He walked around trying to find it until he got lost and could not get back to the ship. She went to try to find him, and she also got lost. The king's son walked further, but he was lost and he was merely blundering around. Then he came upon a path, and it led him to an inhabited area. He did not have any occupation, so he became a servant. The emperor's daughter continued walking, but realized that she was getting lost. She made up her mind that she would stay next to the sea. She went to the shore, where there were fruit trees, and she remained there. During the day she would go down to the sea, hoping to come across some travelers. She survived by eating the fruit. At night, she would climb a tree so that she would be safe from wild animals. Meanwhile, there was an extraordinarily great merchant who had business dealings all over the world. He was very old and only had one son. One day his son said to him, "You are very old. I am still young, and your agents do not pay any heed to me. When you die, I will not know what to do, and I will not have anything. Therefore, let me have a ship with merchandise, and I will sail the sea. This will give me a chance, and I will sail the sea. This will give me a chance to gain experience in business. His father gave him a ship with merchandise, and he went from land to land. He sold his merchandise and bought other goods, and was very successful in his dealings. While at sea, he saw the trees where the emperor's daughter was staying. He and his men assumed that it was an inhabited area, and they wanted to go there. However, when they came close, they realized that there was nothing more than trees, so they decided to leave. Meanwhile, the young merchant looked into the sea. He saw the reflection of a tree, and on top of it, the appearance of a person. He thought that he might be seeing an illusion, so he told the other men who were with him. They looked and also saw what seemed to be the reflection of a person in the tree. They decided to get closer to it and sent a man in a small boat to investigate. Meanwhile, they looked into the sea where they could see the reflection, so that they would be able to guide the scout directly to the right tree, so that he would not go the wrong way. When the scout got there, he saw a person sitting in the tree, and he reported back to them. The merchant's son went to investigate for himself, and he saw the emperor's daughter sitting there. He told her to come down. She replied that she would not go to his ship unless he promised not to touch her until they returned to his home, and he would marry her according to the law. He promised her, and she went with him to the ship. Soon he discovered that she could play musical instruments and speak many languages, and he was very happy to have found her. When they were beginning to come near his home, she told him that it would be proper for him to go home and tell his father, his relatives, and everyone else who knew him, and everyone else who knew him, so that they would come out and welcome her, since he was bringing home such an important woman. She would then tell him who she was. She had earlier made an agreement with him that he would not ask who she was until after the wedding, when he would find out. He agreed to go. She then said to him, "Since you are bringing home a wife like me, it would also be proper that you give all the sailors on the ship something to drink. They will then realize what kind of woman their master is marrying." He also agreed to this. He had some very excellent wine on the ship, and he gave some to the sailors. They became very drunk. The young merchant then went home and told his father and relatives about his bride. Meanwhile, the sailors became drunk and left the ship. They fell asleep and lay on the ground in a drunken stupor. While the merchant's entire family was getting ready to welcome her, the emperor's daughter untied the ship from the dock. She unfurled the sails and sailed the ship. When the merchant's family arrived at the dock, they did not find anything. The elder merchant was furious at his son. "Believe me," cried the son, "I brought home a ship filled with goods." But they saw nothing. "Ask the sailors," he said. The father went to ask them, but they were lying there drunk. When they woke up, he asked them, but they had no idea what had happened to them. They only knew that they had brought a fully laden ship. But now they were completely ignorant of its whereabouts. The elder merchant was furious with his son, and he banished him from his house. He told him that he never wanted to see him again. The son left his father and became a vagrant wanderer. Meanwhile, the emperor's daughter was sailing the sea. At the same time, there was a king who had built his palace near the sea. He felt that this was the best place to build a palace because of the sea breezes and the ships that passed by. When the emperor's daughter sailed the sea, she approached this king's palace. The king looked and saw what appeared to be a ship with no sailors or passengers. He thought that he was seeing an illusion, so he told his men to look, but they also saw the same thing. As the emperor's daughter came closer to the palace, she made up her mind that she had no need for the palace. But when she tried to pull away, the king sent his men and made her come back. They brought her to his palace. This king was not married. He could never make up his mind on anyone. Whenever he wanted a woman, she did not want him, and vice versa. When the emperor's daughter arrived, she demanded that he swear not to touch her until they were legally married. He made an oath to her. She then said that it would not be proper for him to open her ship or even touch it. Rather, it must remain untouched on the sea until the wedding. Then everyone would be able to see the vast amount of goods that she had brought with her. Then people would not say that the king had taken a woman from the street. The king also promised her this. The king wrote to all the nations, inviting them to his wedding. He also built palaces for her. The emperor's daughter demanded that she be given 11 noble women to accompany her. The king issued an order and sent her 11 daughters of the greatest nobles, building a special palace for each one. The emperor's daughter also had her own special palace, where they all came together. The women played musical instruments, and they also played games with her. One day she told the other women that she would like to go down to the sea with them. They went with her, and they played games there. She then offered to serve them some of the very excellent wine that she had. She gave them from the wine. The women became so drunk that they fell asleep and lay there. She then untied the ship, spread the sails, and fled with the ship. When the king and his men discovered that the ship was missing, they became very anxious. The king did not know that the emperor's daughter had fled with the ship. He assumed she was in her chamber. The king said, "Be careful not to tell her too suddenly. She will be very upset because this precious ship is gone. Also, she might think that I gave her ship to someone else. Therefore, send one of her noble women to tell her in a subtle way." The men went to one chamber and did not find anyone there. They then went to the second chamber, and the same was true. They went to all 11 chambers and did not find anyone. Finally, they agreed to send an elderly noblewoman at night to tell her. They all went to the chamber of the emperor's daughter and did not find anyone there. They were very alarmed. Meanwhile, the fathers of these noblewomen were accustomed to getting letters from their daughters. They usually sent letters back and forth, but now they saw that they were sending letters to their daughters and not getting any replies. The nobles decided to go and investigate, but when they arrived, their daughters were not to be found. The nobles were furious, and they wanted to banish the king and place him under a death sentence. As ministers of state, they had the power to do this. But then they thought it over. What did the king do to deserve to be banished? It was really not his fault. Instead, they decided to impeach him and have him exiled. So they impeached the king and exiled him. The king thus went on his way. Meanwhile, the emperor's daughter sailed away on her ship with the 11 noblewomen. When the noblewomen woke up, they continued playing their games, since they did not know that the ship had left port. Finally, they said to her, "Let's go home." "No," she replied, "let's stay here a while longer." A gale struck, strong wind. "Let's go home," they insisted. The emperor's daughter informed them that the ship had already left port. "Why did you do this?" they demanded. She answered that she was afraid that the ship would break up in the storm. Her only choice was to untie it and spread sail. The emperor's daughter and the 11 noblewomen sailed the sea and played their musical instruments. Once they came across a palace, and the lady said, "Let's go there. Let's see if we can come close." The emperor's daughter, however, did not want to. She said that she still regretted that she had even come close to the palace of the king who had tried to marry her. They then sighted an island and drew near to it. There were 12 pirates on the island, and they wanted to kill the women. "Who is the greatest among you?" asked the emperor's daughter. When they pointed him out, she asked, "What is your occupation?" He told her that they were pirates. "We are also pirates," she replied. "You rob with your strength, but we rob with cleverness. We know languages and music. What will you gain if you kill us? Better marry us. Then, in addition to our wealth, you will also have wives." The emperor's daughter showed the pirates everything that was on the ship. Taken in by her words, the pirates also showed the women all their wealth, taking them to all their hiding places. They also agreed that they would not all get married at the same time, but one after another. The pirates would not have a mass wedding, but would get married one after the other. Also, each one would pick out the lady most suitable for him, with the leaders getting first choice. She then offered them some of the fantastically good wine that she had in the ship. She told them that she had never used this wine, since she had put it aside until the time came that God would arrange for her to meet her destined husband. She served the wine in 12 goblets and said that each one should drink to all of the 12 women. She served the wine in 12 goblets and said that each one should drink to all of the 12 women. They drank and became so drunk that they fell asleep. "Come," she said to her companions, "each one of you slit the throat of her destined husband." The women slaughtered all the pirates. They then found their treasures. Which were greater than that of any king. They agreed that they would not take any copper or silver, just gold and precious stones. They threw everything that was not so valuable off the ship and loaded it down with the more valuable gold and precious stones that they found there. The women also agreed that they would not dress like women anymore, so they sewed themselves men's clothing in the German style. They then sailed on in their ship. Meanwhile, there was an elderly king who had an only son. He married his son off and gave him his kingdom. The king's son said that he would take a journey by sea with his wife, so as to accustom her to the sea air. Then, if heaven forbid they were ever forced to flee by sea, she would be prepared. He took his wife and royal ministers and sailed off on a ship. They were very happy and they played games. Then they all decided to take off their clothes. The king and royal ministers on the ship were so elated that they decided to undress, leaving on only their shirts. They then had a contest to see who could climb the mast. The king's son tried to climb first. Meanwhile, the emperor's daughter approached in her ship, and she saw the other ship with the king's son and the ministers. At first, she was afraid to come close, but when the women saw that the men were playing games, they realized that they were not pirates, so they came closer. The emperor's daughter said to her companions, "I can knock that bald one into the sea." This was the king's son who was climbing the mast. The king's son had lost all his hair and was bald. "How is that possible?" they asked. "We are still quite far from them." She told them that she had a burning glass. And would use it to knock him down. She explained that she would not knock him down until he had climbed to the very top of the mast. As long as he was climbing the mast, he would fall down to the ship, but when he was on the top, he would fall into the sea. She waited until he reached the very top of the mast, and then she aimed her burning glass at his head. His brain was burned, and he fell into the sea. When the men on the king's ship saw him fall, there was great panic. How could they ever return home? The old king would die of grief. They decided to go over to the ship belonging to the emperor's daughter. Perhaps there would be a physician who could give them some advice. They came close to the ship, carrying the emperor's daughter and her ladies, and the men on the dead king's ship said to the ladies and the emperor's daughter that they should not be afraid. They would not do anything to harm them. The men asked them, "Do you have a physician on board? Perhaps he can give us some advice." They told them the whole story about how the king's son had fallen into the sea. "Fish him out of the sea," said the emperor's daughter. The men located the body and took him out of the water. The emperor's daughter felt the dead king's pulse with her hand and announced that his brain was burned. They opened up his head, exposing his brain, and they saw that she was right. They were dumbfounded. The men asked her to go home with them, where she would be the king's personal physician. She could be very important and have high status. She demurred, saying that she was not really a physician, but merely had certain specialized knowledge. The men on the king's ship, however, did not want to return home, so the two ships sailed alongside each other. The royal ministers decided that it would be a very good thing if their queen would marry this physician, since they saw that he had very great wisdom. The ministers of the king's son who fell and died thought that the emperor's daughter and her ladies were men, since they were wearing men's clothing. Therefore, they wanted their queen, the wife of the king's son who had just died, to marry the physician, who was really the emperor's daughter. They thought that she was a physician because she had the wisdom to understand that the brain of the royal prince who fell had been burned. If the physician would do this, he would be their king. They would then kill their elderly king. The royal ministers wanted this very much. They found it impossible to say anything to the queen about marrying the physician. The queen also thought that it would be very good to marry the physician, but she was afraid that the nation would not want him as their king. The royal ministers decided to make a drinking party, so that when everyone was joyous at the party, they would be able to speak of the match. Each minister made a party on his day. When the day came for the physician, who was actually the emperor's daughter, to give his party, he gave them some of his special wine. When they were drunk and in a good mood, the ministers declared that it would be nice if the queen would marry the physician. The physician said that it would be very nice, but only if it would be declared without a drunken mouth, when everyone was not drunk. The queen spoke up and said how nice it would be to marry the physician, but the nation will have to agree to it. The emperor's daughter replied, "It would be very nice, but only if they would say it without a drunken mouth." When the ministers recovered from their drunkenness, they remembered what they had said, and they were ashamed to face the queen, because they had made such a statement. The queen, however, had made a similar declaration, and she was also ashamed to face them. Nevertheless, they had proposed this first. They began to discuss this and agreed that she would should marry the physician, that is, the emperor's daughter, whom they still thought to be a physician. They returned to their own country. When the people saw them coming, they were very happy. It had been a long time since the king's son had left, and they did not know where he was. The elderly king had already died before they came. Then the populace saw that the king's son was not there. "Where is our king?" they asked. The royal ministers told them the whole story about how the king's son had died, and how they had accepted a new king who was now arriving with them. The people were very happy that the ministers had brought them a new king. The king, that is the emperor's daughter, who was now the king, ordered that an announcement be made throughout each and every country that every foreigner, visitor, fugitive, and exile must come to his wedding. No one should dare absent himself, and they would receive great gifts. The emperor's daughter, who was now king, also ordered that wells be dug all around the city, so that when anyone wanted to drink, he would not have to go anywhere, but would immediately have a well nearby. The emperor's daughter, who was king, also gave orders that her portrait be placed next to every well. Watches should then be set up, and if anyone stared at the image and made a bad face, looking surprised and grieved, he should be taken prisoner. It was all set up, and the three people she had previously encountered came. They were the first king's son, who was the true husband of the emperor's daughter, who was now king; the merchant's son, whose father had driven him away after the emperor's daughter had fled with the ship and all the merchandise; and the king, who had been impeached because she had fled from him with the 11 noblewomen. All three of them recognized her picture. When they looked at the picture, they remembered her and they grieved. When they had come to the wells and saw her picture there, they recognized her and stared at the pictures. They were arrested and placed in prison. At the wedding, the emperor's daughter, who was king, ordered that the prisoners be brought before him, and all three were brought. She immediately recognized them, but since she was dressed like a man, they did not recognize her. Addressing the impeached king, who was now one of the three prisoners, the emperor's daughter said, "You, king, you were impeached because 11 noble women were lost. Here are the noble women. Return to your land and your kingdom." The 11 noble women were there with her. After addressing the impeached king, she addressed the merchant's son and said, "You, merchant, your father drove you away because you lost the ship with merchandise. Here is your ship and all the merchandise. Since your money was tied up so long, the wealth on your ship has been increased many-fold." The ship with the merchandise in which she had fled was still intact. The ship also contained the wealth that she had taken from the pirates. This was enormous wealth, many times the value of what was on the ship previously. Addressing her true bridegroom, she then said, "And you, royal prince, let us go home." With that, they both returned home. Blessed be God forever. Amen and amen.